So, apparently giving first impressions is a bad thing, because it's not as objective as people would have preferred, or maybe as I advertised it, and I'm going to keep doing it. Ha ha ha. No. I'm just here to basically talk in this particular video. I don't necessarily need to make an objective stance on this, although I very much could if I had the time to do it. I probably will in a future video, but I just wanted to give my first impressions on this particular tweet here because I found it really, really interesting. So we have the most objective and correct TF2 game mode ranking. Who anyone who disagrees is wrong, and I find that funny because I like being objective about this sort of thing. So I'll try to be as objective as I can, but admittedly, this is off the cuff. You know, this is unscripted, so bear with me here. So in S tier, payload and attack defend. A tier, king of the hill, player destruction. B, 5 control point. C, payload race and capture the flag. Fun on community servers, but still bad is arena and medieval attack / defend. And F is pastime and manpower. Okay, so I don't know what his metrics are for an objective assessment of this, but I would assume, just thinking about it, right, that the most objective, the objectively best Team Fortress 2 game mode would probably have something to do with challenging the player's skill in a unique fashion that allows all the classes to function at their optimal proficiency, challenges the mind of each player the most, regardless of class or team, in a way that is still engaging and rewarding to experience both emotionally and within the game, right? So, interesting layout. I haven't played enough of player destruction to necessarily have a metric on it. I don't even think that player destruction is a good TF2 game mode in and of itself, though. From the bit I've played, it's a glorified frag fest where you just have to deliver your cash to the objective at a certain point, but it's nothing more than glorified team deathmatch. There's nothing as intrinsically rewarding to it as something like payload or 5 control points. But again, I haven't played very much of it, so if I played more of it, maybe my mind would change, but at the moment, that's just where I stand. I would really love to have sorted these into attack, defense, and like universal game modes, I suppose, because 5 control point and King of the Hill and capture the flag, and I guess payload race, technically, are game modes in which both teams contribute equally, right? They can capture each other's points and defend their own points, right? And there's a push and shove with it that goes both directions. With something like standard payload or standard attack defend, right, you have an attacking team and a defending team, and that is just how things work. And there's lockdowns for certain points, and you can't recapture them, right? King of the Hill and 5 control point especially are these types of game modes where both teams have equal agency and equal opportunity for certain skills to be challenged at the same time for both teams, for all players. Payload is by far the most engaging, I would say, because you're moving, as the attacking team, you're moving an object to whatever the destination is, and you're capturing points and locking them as you would in attack defend, where you capture a big disc and you lock that point. The difference, of course, being that the cart actually can roll back, but only up to the point. So it is locked in a sense, but progress can be slowed in the same way that a capture can on attack defend. So they're very synonymous with each other. They're very much... they're almost the same, but because one is standing on a disc and the other is moving an object, the map layouts have to be completely different, and the mentality towards it is very different because it kind of shifts all the tactics, really. But generally speaking, I would say that they function on the same principle, you know, obviously from the standpoint of attack versus defense. I really do think, though, that 5 control point is far more valuable of a game mode for the learning experience that it provides, as well as the ability to have an inherently satisfying comeback, right? And that sounds a bit subjective, but 5 Control Point lends itself very much to comebacks, as it were. With something like Payload, if they pressure throughout all the points up until last, and then there's like a stop, that's technically a comeback for defense, but they're not pushing the cart like back all the way, they're just halting it. So in a sense, it's not so much of a comeback to victory as much as it is a stopping of the other team's victory, right? With 5 Control Point, and to a lesser extent, I suppose, King of the Hill, you have teams that can all capture the same points. Like I said earlier, there's an equal opportunity there. And maybe this is talking more anecdotally and a bit more subjectively, but from my experience and the experiences that I've had with other players, other new players, the best game modes for beginners are 5 Control Point and Capture the Flag, because they are symmetrical in their layout. Well, and I guess King of the Hill too, because all 3 of those are symmetrical in their layout. The stakes are very clear. Each team has the same thing to do. They just have to do theirs first, like before the other team. And you can have some seriously intense, well-coordinated games with your team on those game modes. With attack-defense type game modes, it's a bit different because you're trying to achieve different goals, and that creates a completely different dynamic. So in a weird sense, I don't even think that Payload and 5 Control Point are comparable outside of a subjective lens. I really think that, that perhaps they need to be separated into 2 different categories, because the dynamics of the game are rather different in game modes that have 2 teams doing the same thing, trying to outpace each other, versus one team trying to stop the other team from doing their thing, and the other team trying to do their thing and break the red team, right? Because red team's defense, trying to break red team's defenses, right? Payload Race, I would guess, is the same. I've played a lot of Payload Race in source mods and even a little bit in regular TF2. But I will say that Payload Race is very different in its equal nature, because they are the focus has now shifted to where you're no longer the point, as it were. Like, you're not the person who's actively capturing a point in the sense that you're standing on a disc and trying to defend the disc in the same way that you would defend a cart, right? You're moving an object to its goal. You yourself are not the causer of the goal, if that makes any sense. Well, that's not true, because the cart is something that you do cause into motion, right? So that's a bit difficult. I guess I would lump Payload in with the I guess I'll call them unilateral game modes, for lack of a better term. Arena mode is super engaging and a lot of fun. I do say that rather subjectively, because I know that a lot of people hate it from the standpoint that they wait a long time to respawn. However, in the source mods that I've played, many of them, where I have actually played arena mode a fair bit, it's an excellent challenge to stay alive as long as you can and wind up the one being victorious. You know, obviously you don't want to kill the time, right? Because there's like I think there's like a 2-minute timer before the point, like the central control point opens up for capture, and then people can capture the point if somebody's trying to run the clock out and just decides not to play, right? So there is that. On the other hand, I know that a lot of people don't like waiting in spawn, but in my head, right, it would make the most sense that people would see it as a challenge to their skill to learn how to improve. And back in old school TF2, right, when you still had 45-minute map timers, and yes, you could still rock the vote Most community servers, I'm pretty sure, had that. I know the community servers that I played on in source mods definitely had it, because a lot of people didn't like sticking around arena mode for no longer than 25 to 30 minutes. But even still, that's a fairly long time to really challenge yourself and push yourself to work with your team to kill all the other guys first, or at least a sort of free-for-all. The problem with arena mode inherently isn't that there's long times to wait if you're the first one to die, because that's just the consequence of your skill issue, and you know that going into the game, and those are just the rules of the game, and you're there to play the game, right? That's not the issue. That's like objectively the problem with it. The problem with it is that it implicitly incentivizes glorified team deathmatch with no team coordination, right? It's very much a free-for-all, and you kind of wait until the dust settles and see who from each team is still alive, or how many from each team are still alive, right? So arena doesn't lend itself very well to team play in a sense, but if you do work with your team, it does wind up being an incredibly engaging experience, because every decision you make suddenly becomes way more deliberate and way more focused and very team-centric, very objective-oriented, and it's really, really cool from that standpoint. It's an excellent challenge for people who already have a lot of skill in the game, enough skill to continue being challenged in that regard. For beginner players, it's not a good introduction to the game. A great introduction to the game is 5 control point and attack defend. I wouldn't even say payload is necessarily beginner friendly, more like beginner +1 friendly. I would never recommend a beginner play payload as their first game mode. I would say King of the Hill, attack defend, and 5 control point, because those are the easiest to understand. King of the Hill, you're standing on a point and trying to maintain it for as long as you can. Attack defend, you either defend a point or you attack it, and you lock it down to move on to the next stage, right? 5 control point is very much where the tug of war really comes in full swing. Like with Koth, you only get 1 point. With 5 control point, you get 5. And there's a lot of give and take that teams can have, and a lot of weaknesses that can suddenly be exploited out of nowhere and really pushed, and you can have these major comebacks in a game that are really cathartic for the player and very much in line with the team-oriented design of the game, right? Payload is attack defend on steroids, because you're not the objective in a sense. The players aren't the objective. The object that the players are moving are the objective, and that it creates much more engagement, but at the same time it does raise the stakes a bit. So I would say that payload isn't necessarily the most beginner friendly. So from that metric, I don't know. I'd have to. The problem is that there's so many dynamics to consider in regards of objectively quantifying Team Fortress 2 game modes, to the point where I would really argue that most of them hold up very well on their own. Most of them, like, this list should really just be ABC instead of S, A, B, C, D, F. Because there's so many that challenge the player in ways that other game modes don't, and provide different dynamics that the player learns to be aware of, regardless of what class they're playing, regardless of their skill level, right? It's each a unique challenge in and of itself, and the game modes are all made to be as equally engaging as possible, while still being as unique as possible and distinct in their own ways. That and there's a complete difference between 3-stage payload, and like the attack defend format, and 1-stage 4 or 5 point payload. That's a completely those two. I would argue that those are almost like completely different categories in a sense, because priorities are shifted in that regard. And that's not only from my experience, but just learning more about the game mode and how it works, right? Medieval Attack Defend has always confused me because it doesn't fit the design of the game at all. It focuses on a subcategory of a subcategory. It's basically like taking the subclass of Demo Knight and running to the hills with it. and I'm not sure that that's best for the game because it's not Team Fortress 2 at its core. It's not the most team-oriented. Options are stripped down very intensely, and the dynamic is completely different. I would argue that Medieval Attack Defend is much more a modified experience of the game, still within the medium of Team Fortress 2, but not Team Fortress 2 at its core. It's modified very intensely, and it's the same with Pastime and Manpower. Pastime and Manpower are much more oriented around the physics of the game, and Medieval Attack Defend is much more focused around the idea that you can strip all the classes down to very basic raw materials, like Medic only getting a crossbow, Sniper only getting his bow and arrow. Demo Knights, of course, have only access to their swords, and the rest of the classes are pretty much resigned to their melee options, I believe. I think Pyros still get their flare guns. I don't actually remember. It depends on how you play it, because I remember playing on a server that actually allowed flares to still exist, and I don't know if that's the base version of the mode, because I've only ever played the mode on community servers, and I don't know if those have modifications on them. I've never played Medieval Attack Defend in casual itself, I don't think. If I have, I don't remember. But yeah, I would say Medieval Attack Defend and Pastime and Manpower don't even belong on this list, in the sense that while they are technically officially supported by Valve, they aren't Team Fortress 2. They're not like territory control, like Hydro, right? Where it's one massive map and it's a tug of war as to how many areas you can actually control, and then finally getting to the last area you need to capture, right? It's not that level of engagement in that particular manner, right? Where it's like territory control is attack, defend, but both teams get to attack and defend and take their territories from each other until you get to the last one, right? Where if you're at the last point, you have to just defend it, and that will run the clock out and I think reset the map. I don't actually know, because most of those last rounds wind up resulting in the victory of the attacking team. At least from my experience. So yeah, I wouldn't even include Medieval Attack Defend, Pastime, or Manpower on this list, just because they are intensely modified versions of the game, right down to the mechanics. Arena's a tough one to include, because not only has it not received official support in the same way that other game modes have from Valve, but it also takes away the ability for the team to function super collectively, right? Because everyone understands that they only get one life, and then that's it until the round ends, and then moves on to the next round. And that's pretty difficult, because how do you exactly orient a team game around that? It's a lot more challenging, but if you can overcome that challenge, of course, it's an incredibly rewarding experience. If you're really able to focus and hone in on it and not just treat it like it's every man for himself, you can really have something there. The problem, too, of course, is that all game modes really expect the players to behave competently and expect them to understand the rules well enough to actually play as effectively as possible. And a lot of players don't do that with certain game modes, because they choose not to prioritize the incentive based on how easy it is to them and not on the objective metric, right? That's the same reason why a lot of people have problems with Capture the Flag as a game mode, because they believe that the flag inherently isn't a good enough incentive to actually capture it. And I don't know what would satisfy players like that would push them to actually capture the flag more. Probably if rounds lasted longer, frankly, on the official Valve servers, because everyone's going to want to play on the official Valve servers, right? And casual matchmaking doesn't really provide that, because rounds end after just one victory for Capture the Flag in casual mode presently, and that's really rough. That's really rough. So I don't know how I'd reorient this list, because it's all dependent on which facets of the game you're focusing on, from beginner friendly to expert friendly. It would be King of the Hill, capture the flag, attack, defend, 5 control point, payload race, arena, and player maybe player destruction before arena. I'm basically ignoring medieval, attack, defend, and pastime and manpower because they're far too modified to really be considered the actual core game. You know what I mean? There's still team play, and there's definitely still victories to achieve, but it's so different to the point where it's not the game. It's not the design of the game anymore. It's very much an experience provided in the medium of the game, like I said, that they've modified their servers to have. And that's perfectly fine. People can play physics-based games in the game, but it's not Team Fortress 2. It's pastime in TF2. It's very, very much its own thing, which I assume would be self-evident, but who knows? Maybe there's some pastime players that get really cranky in the comments and they're like, what do you mean? Pastime is totally TF2 because it's actually in TF2. And it's like, that's not a good enough constitution of a game mode being the game, right? Or a good representation of the game. In terms of how well the game mode incentivizes the goal, as well as naturally challenging the player's skill, regardless of what class they're playing, regardless of what weapons they're using, across the board as a team unit and on your own, combining all of those factors and like still having it be an engaging experience that will naturally incentivize the goal by nature of things like map design and, you know, things like that. I would say King of the Hill is the best game mode. Well, no, not King of the Hill. Ooh, this is tough. Because again, I want to separate things into two distinct categories of the attack-defense game modes versus the unilateral game modes. And there's so many more unilateral game modes than attack-defense game modes. It's a shame that territory control wasn't expanded upon more as a game mode, because that had some serious potential to be something truly spectacular. You can do a lot in terms of both teams being able to attack and defend, but in an attack-defend format that eventually gets pushed to its limits and like a final victory is still achieved. But it's all within the same area. It's non-linear in a sense. So in terms of what challenges the player the most in a way that doesn't seek to undermine the player, regardless of class, regardless of skill, I think that the objective best game modes for TF2 would be 5 control point and payload together pretty equally, really, because they challenge different things in such a unique format that, in two distinctly unique formats, I apologize, that I would argue that they're equal with each other in terms of that. And then underneath them, I would have King of the Hill, attack, defend, and capture the flag. And then payload race and territory control. And then player destruction and arena. Player destruction is weird, because I think of that seal map that got added in that summer update as player destruction, right? Because it is a player destruction map, and I don't care for the glorified frag fest nature that it is. There's no team cohesion in such a game mode. There's no team cohesion that's incentivized in the game mode in as far as the objective and what it actually asks of the players to achieve. So on an objective metric, I don't even think that player destruction is necessarily TF2. It skirts the line. It really does. I wouldn't say it's as grievous as medieval attack defend, but I would say that it's not Team Fortress 2 enough. If that makes sense. It probably doesn't. Like I said, this is off the cuff. It's unscripted, so I am talking mostly on the fly, but trying to be as objective as I can. Studying my own experiences and how I understand the game modes to be on paper versus in practice, understanding what the game actually expects from the players and how competent most players actually are, which isn't a lot of the time, but yeah, those are my thoughts on this tier list. I'd rearrange things a bit differently in terms of what the game modes actually ask. If Wheezy actually wants to like talk with me about this, that would be really funny. Wheezy, if you want to talk about this list and try to arrange this a bit more objectively, I think I'd very much enjoy that conversation, because this kind of conversation is really interesting from a philosophical standpoint. Practically speaking, it serves no purpose because everyone's going to have their tastes as to what game modes they prefer to play, of course. But in terms of objectively what the game modes actually do for the player, what they provide to the game, how they serve the game as an art form, and what the game like definitionally is, and the challenges it seeks to provide, the objectives it asks you to complete, and how the game expects you to be competent enough to learn from your mistakes and push through to succeed. I think that these game modes should be reoriented completely. I think that this list... I think this list requires an overhaul, basically. So, yeah, those are my thoughts. Probably unwarranted, probably ridiculous. I just wanted to talk about it because I found this pretty interesting.